The air in La Seta d'Oro was a carefully curated symphony of hushed reverence and extravagant wealth. It smelled of white truffle, aged leather, and the faint floral perfume of women who had never known a moment of hardship. Crystal glasses, so fine they seemed to hum, caught the soft golden light from Murano chandeliers, casting dancing diamonds across tables draped in immaculate fret linens. Here, in the heart of Milan, dinner was not a meal, it was a performance, and every waiter, every sommelier was a silent actor in a play directed by the whims of the global elite. Ilara Vance moved through this opulent theatre with a practiced invisibility. Her black uniform was simple, functional, a stark contrast to the couture gowns and bespoke suits of the clientele. Her hair was pulled back in a severe knot, revealing a face that was pleasant but intentionally forgettable. She was efficient, her movements fluid and economical, her presence as unobtrusive as a shadow. For 3 months, she had been a ghost, observing, listening, learning the rhythms of this world. Tonight was the final act. At the restaurant's prime table, nestled in a velvet-draped alcove, sat Alessandro Rossi. He wasn't just a diner, he was the sun around which this entire universe orbited. Known as the Wolf of Milan, his empire, Rossi Global Holdings, had its tentacles in everything from technology to textiles. He was a man carved from arrogance and ambition, with a predator's smile and eyes that assessed everything and everyone for their value and vulnerability. Tonight he was holding court, his voice a low, confident rumble as he charmed 2 Japanese investors, his hands gesturing with theatrical grace. On his wrist, a universe of gears and jewels spun within the platinum case of a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. It was a unique piece, rumoured to be worth over €3 million, a gaudy monument to his own success. Ilara approached the table, her silver tray bearing a bottle of 1985 Barolo, a wine that cost more than her monthly rent. Her heart was a cold, steady drum against her ribs. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. As she leaned in to pour, her movements precise, one of the investors shifted his chair unexpectedly. It was a minor bump, a jostle that a seasoned waitress would normally absorb without a second thought. But tonight it was the catalyst. A single ruby-red drop of the Barolo escaped the bottle's lip. It arced through the air in slow motion, a tiny perfect sphere of liquid sin, and landed squarely on the stark white cuff of Alessandro Rossi's shirt. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air from the room. The low hum of conversation ceased, the clinking of cutlery stopped. Every eye in La Seta d'Oro turned towards their table. Alessandro looked down at the tiny spreading stain. A dark flush crept up his neck, his charming facade melting away to reveal something ugly and volatile beneath. He didn't look at the investor who had bumped her, he looked at Ilara. His eyes, cold and furious, pinned her in place. "You clumsy, incompetent fool," he hissed, his voice low but carrying the sharp crack of a whip. "Do you have any idea what this shirt costs? Do you know who I am?" Ilara remained still, her face a pale, impassive mask. "My apologies, signore. It was an accident." "An accident?" He laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of humor. He was performing now, using her as a prop to demonstrate his power to his guests. "Accidents are for people who don't matter. People like you. You exist to be perfect for people like me." He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the marble floor, and rose to his full, intimidating height. He loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. The restaurant manager, a perpetually nervous man named Signore Bellini, began to scurry towards them, his face ashen. But he was too slow. Alessandro raised his hand. The motion was fluid, almost casual, but filled with a chilling intent. He slapped her. The sound was sharp and obscene in the sacred quiet of the restaurant. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Ilara's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, a fiery bloom of pain spreading across her cheek. For a heartbeat, she saw stars dance in the periphery of her vision. She tasted blood, a coppery tang where her teeth had cut the inside of her lip. She didn't cry out. She didn't flinch. She slowly, deliberately, turned her head back to face him. The blank, forgettable mask of the waitress was gone. In its place was something ancient and unyielding. The fire she had kept banked for so long was now a raging inferno in her eyes. The room held its breath, waiting for tears, for apologies, for her to crumble. Alessandro Rossi, the Wolf of Milan, had just made the final and most catastrophic mistake of his life. The sting on Ilara's cheek was a grounding force, a hot physical anchor in the swirling vortex of shock that had enveloped the room. Alessandro stood before her, his chest puffed out, a smug, cruel satisfaction glinting in his eyes. He expected her to dissolve into tears, to be dragged away by the horrified manager, to become a sordid little anecdote he would tell for years to come. He saw a poor waitress. He saw nothing. Ilara's gaze dropped from his face to his wrist. The Patek Philippe gleamed under the soft light, its intricate face a testament to precision and power. It was his symbol, the ultimate declaration of his status. He wore it not to tell time, but to tell the world that his time was more valuable than anyone else's. It was, she thought with a cold clarity, the perfect metaphor for the man himself. Ostentatious, complex on the surface, but ultimately just a machine, and machines could be broken. Her movements were a blur of calculated speed. Before Alessandro could even register her intent, before the stunned investors could move, her hand shot out. It wasn't a clumsy grab, it was a surgeon's strike. Her fingers wrapped around the heavy platinum case, her thumb depressing the clasp with a practiced click she had studied for weeks on grainy security footage. She slid the multi-million-euro timepiece from his wrist with a single fluid motion. Alessandro blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. He looked at his now bare wrist, then back at her, his mouth half open to spew another insult. But the words died in his throat. Ilara didn't run. She didn't cower. She held the watch in her palm, its weight feeling both obscene and insignificant. With a chilling calm, she turned and walked away from the table. The silence in the restaurant was now so profound, it felt like a pressure against the eardrums. Every diner was a statue, every waiter a pillar of salt. They watched her as she moved with the unhurried grace of a queen striding through her court. Her destination was a small marble-topped service station near the kitchen doors. On it sat an assortment of tools for the staff, a wine key, a crumb scraper, and a heavy solid steel ice hammer used for breaking down large blocks for cocktails. Her fingers closed around the cold, weighted handle of the hammer. It felt right. It felt just. She placed the Patek Philippe on the pristine marble surface. The tiny ticking heart of the masterpiece was visible through its sapphire crystal caseback, a frantic, living thing. For a moment it was beautiful. Then she raised the hammer. Alessandro finally found his voice. It was a strangled roar of disbelief and fury. "What are you doing? Stop her. That watch is worth more than your entire miserable life." He lunged forward, but his investors, more shocked than he was, instinctively held him back. Signore Bellini, who had finally reached the scene, simply stood, paralyzed, his hands fluttering uselessly at his sides. Ilara ignored the shouts. She looked down at the watch, at the tiny, perfect hands marking the seconds of Alessandro Rossi's reign. Then she brought the hammer down. The first strike was a sickening crack, the sound of splintering sapphire and protesting metal. It wasn't a clean break. The crystal crazed into 1,000 tiny fractures, a spiderweb of destruction. She raised the hammer again, her breath steady, her arm a piston of pure, focused rage. The second blow was a crunching, grinding impact that flattened the platinum casing, silencing the delicate mechanism within forever. The third, fourth, and fifth blows were a frenzy of annihilation, reducing the pinnacle of Swiss watchmaking into a mangled, unrecognizable heap of twisted metal, shattered jewels, and broken gears. When she was finished, she let the hammer drop to the floor with a loud clang that echoed the finality of her actions. She was breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from the release of a pressure that had been building inside her for 5 long years. She turned to face the wreckage of a man who just moments before had been the king of this world. Alessandro's face was a mask of apoplectic rage, his skin a blotchy, unhealthy red. Spittle flew from his lips as he screamed obscenities at her, fighting against the restraining hands of his companions. Ilara calmly wiped a smudge of grease from her hand onto her apron. She met his furious, uncomprehending gaze, and for the first time that night she smiled. It was a small, sharp, dangerous smile. "Don't worry about the watch, Mr. Rossi," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through his tirade like a shard of glass. It carried across the silent room, each word a perfectly placed dagger. "Consider it a severance package." She took a small step towards him, her eyes never leaving his. "As of 10 minutes ago, my lawyer, Mr. Julian Croft of the London firm, Croft and Sterling, finalized the last of a series of coordinated stock acquisitions through a network of shell corporations. The transaction is complete." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting him and everyone else in that room hang on her next words. "I just bought your entire empire." The statement hung in the air, an impossible, ludicrous claim that seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen from the room. Alessandro Rossi stopped struggling, the rage on his face contorted into a mask of utter disbelief, followed by a wave of derisive laughter. "You," he spat, wrenching his arms free from his investors, "you, a pathetic little waitress, bought Rossi Global. Are you insane? Do you know how much my company is worth? You couldn't afford the dirt on my shoes." Ilara's smile didn't waver. "Your company was worth 27 billion euros on the Milan Stock Exchange at closing bell yesterday, Alessandro. A valuation propped up by over-leveraged assets and predatory loans, the debt for which, coincidentally, my fund has been quietly acquiring for the past 18 months. Your actual net worth is considerably less." Her knowledge was so specific, so precise, that a flicker of genuine uncertainty finally entered his eyes. He looked at his investors, who were now staring at Ilara not as a madwoman, but as something else entirely. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, the grand entrance doors of La Seta d'Oro swung open. A man in a flawlessly tailored Savile Row suit strode in, followed by two imposing figures who were clearly professional security. The man was in his late 50s, with silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and an air of unshakable authority. It was Julian Croft. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Ilara, and gave a subtle, respectful nod. Then he turned his attention to the sputtering billionaire. "Mr. Rossi," Julian began, his voice a calm British baritone that commanded immediate attention. "My name is Julian Croft. I represent Vance Legacy Holdings. I'm here to formally serve you notice." He gestured to one of his associates, who stepped forward and handed a thick leather-bound portfolio to Alessandro's bewildered lawyer, who had been dining at a nearby table. As of 7:42 p.m. Central European Time, Vance Legacy Holdings has successfully acquired a 51.7% controlling stake in Rossi Global Holdings. The board has been notified. The stock exchange has been notified. A press release is scheduled for 9 p.m. sharp. Alessandro snatched the portfolio, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the clasp. He ripped out the top document, his eyes scanning the dense legal text with frantic speed. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty grey pallor. The numbers, the signatures, the official seals, they were all real. It was impossible, but it was real. "Vance Legacy," he stammered, looking from the papers to Ilara, his mind failing to connect the two. "Who is Vance?" Ilara finally took a step closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at her, truly look at her, for the first time. "You don't remember the name, do you, Alessandro? You crush so many people on your way to the top, you can't be expected to recall all of them. Let me remind you." Her voice dropped, losing its public declamatory tone and becoming something intensely personal, a whisper of venom meant only for him. "Arthur Vance, founder and CEO of Innovate Dynamics, a brilliant engineer, a decent man. You remember him now, don't you? You spent 2 years circling his company like a shark, stealing his patents through industrial espionage, bribing his board members, and finally launching a hostile takeover with fabricated charges of financial misconduct that ruined his reputation." Recognition dawned in Alessandro's eyes, followed by a wave of dawning horror. Innovate Dynamics had been the crown jewel of his early conquests, the company whose groundbreaking technology had formed the very foundation of his empire. "He fought you," Ilara continued, her voice trembling with a tightly controlled grief. He poured everything he had into saving the company he built from nothing. When you finally took it from him, you didn't just take his business, you took his life. The stress of the legal battles, the public humiliation, it triggered a series of strokes. He spent the last 3 years of his life in a hospital bed, unable to speak, unable to move. He died 5 years ago. She leaned in closer still, her eyes boring into his. Arthur Vance was my father, and you, Mr. Rossi, you are looking at his legacy. The revelation struck Alessandro with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back, his hand coming up to his chest as if to ward her off. This wasn't a corporate raid. This was a ghost story. This was a reckoning. Ilara straightened up, her personal vengeance delivered. She was all business again. She turned away from the shell-shocked billionaire and addressed his 2 Japanese investors, who were watching the scene unfold with a mixture of awe and terror. "Gentlemen," she said, her tone crisp and authoritative, "my name is Ilara Vance, the new majority shareholder and acting CEO of, well, we'll be rebranding back to Innovate Dynamics shortly. I believe Mr. Rossi is no longer in a position to negotiate the terms of your joint venture. Perhaps you'd care to join me for a proper discussion. My table is waiting." She gestured towards the restaurant's exclusive private dining room, where another team of her associates was already waiting. Then she glanced at the stunned Signore Bellini. "Please have the bill for Mr. Rossi's table and the cost of that bottle of wine sent to my new corporate headquarters. And add a generous tip for all the staff. They've had to endure far too much tonight." With a final dismissive look at the broken man and the glittering debris of his watch on the floor, Ilara Vance turned and walked towards her new future, leaving the Wolf of Milan to be consumed by the ruins of his own making. The chaos that erupted in La Seta d'Oro after Ilara's departure was a study in collapsing power dynamics. Alessandro Rossi, who had entered the restaurant as a titan, now seemed to shrink within his expensive suit. The aura of invincibility that had always surrounded him had evaporated, leaving behind a frantic, middle-aged man clutching a portfolio of documents that read like his own obituary. His lawyer, a man named Marco, was pale and sweating, his own professional world crumbling in tandem with his client's. "This can't be legal," Alessandro snarled, shoving the papers at him. "They can't just do this." "Alessandro, the paperwork looks legitimate," Marco stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "The share purchases, the regulatory filings, this has been in motion for years. It's airtight." As if on cue, Alessandro's phone, which had been resting on the table, began to vibrate violently, skittering across the linen like a panicked insect. The screen lit up with the name of his CFO, Giovanni. He snatched it up, his hand shaking. "Giovanni! What the hell is going on? Tell me this is some kind of sick joke." The voice on the other end was strained, panicked. "Alessandro, it's not a joke. It's a bloodbath. We've been completely blindsided. A firm called Vance Legacy Holdings triggered a mandatory disclosure clause. They've been buying shares through dozens of proxies for years. They hit the 51% threshold an hour ago. The board called an emergency virtual meeting. You've been removed as chairman and CEO, effective immediately. Your access codes have been revoked. They've locked us out, Alessandro. They've locked us out of our own company." Alessandro's phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. The world was tilting on its axis. He looked around the restaurant. No one was looking at him with fear or reverence anymore. They were staring with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, as if he were a particularly fascinating animal in a cage. The 2 Japanese investors were already being escorted into the private dining room by Ilara's security team, not even bothering to give him a backward glance. He had become irrelevant in the space of 15 minutes. While Ilara Vance was methodically resurrecting her father's legacy, Alessandro Rossi was experiencing the specific gravity of a fall from a great height. His life didn't just unravel, it was publicly and systematically dismantled. The story of the Waitress CEO was a global sensation, a modern fable that the media feasted upon for weeks. Every detail of his humiliation was dissected on news channels and financial blogs. He became a caricature of hubris, a cautionary tale told in boardrooms from Tokyo to New York. He retreated to his penthouse, a glass palace overlooking Milan, but the walls offered no sanctuary. The calls stopped. The invitations vanished. The men who had once called him a genius now called him a fool behind his back. Bailiffs arrived with court orders, their polite, impassive faces more terrifying than any threat. They inventoried his art collection, his wine cellar, his fleet of custom cars. Each item was a monument to a victory, and now each was being tagged for liquidation to cover the debts Ilara's funds had called in. His breaking point came on a Tuesday. He was trying to place a call to a Swiss banker, a man he'd made obscenely rich, only to be told by a frosty secretary that Herr Schmidt was unavailable. As he hung up, he saw a news report on the television he'd forgotten to turn off. It was Ilara Vance, standing outside the company headquarters. With a quiet dignity, she was overseeing the removal of the giant, garish brass letters that spelled out Rossi Tower. In their place, workers were hoisting the original elegant silver script, Innovate Dynamics. A primal scream of rage and impotence tore from his throat. He hurled a crystal decanter at the screen, shattering it in a shower of glass and expensive whiskey. It changed nothing. He was a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. His rage finally burned itself out, leaving behind the cold ash of a single obsessive question. How? How could a waitress, even a billionaire's secret daughter, have orchestrated something so flawless, so total? It felt like more than a financial strategy. It felt like a betrayal from within. After weeks of silence, his frantic pleading messages to Ilara's office were finally answered with a single terse email. Café Cova, tomorrow, 10 a.m. He arrived looking like a spectre of his former self. His suit, once bespoke, now hung on his gaunt frame, the shoulders slumped. Dark circles pooled beneath his eyes, and a nervous tic had developed at the corner of his left eye. He moved with a hesitant, shuffling gait, a man who had forgotten how to command space. Ilara was already there, sitting by the window of the historic café, the morning light catching the quiet confidence in her expression. She wore a simple cream-colored blouse, yet she looked more powerful than he ever had in his prime. He collapsed into the chair opposite her, the movement jerky and uncoordinated. How? He asked, the word a ragged whisper. It wasn't just the money. The timing, the precision. You knew every move I was going to make. You knew where every skeleton was buried. Someone on the inside helped you. Someone betrayed me. Ilara took a slow sip of her espresso, placing the cup back on the saucer with a soft, deliberate click. Her gaze was steady and unreadable. Betrayal, Alessandro? That's a word for people who believe in loyalty. You only ever believed in leverage. Don't play games with me, he rasped, leaning forward, his voice a pathetic echo of its former authority. Who was it? I'll ruin them. I still have connections. His voice trailed off as he saw the flicker of pity in her eyes. He had nothing. You're right, she said, her tone disarmingly calm. It always surprised me how little you understood about people. You thought loyalty could be bought, like a car or a watch. You never realized that true loyalty is earned and that the memory of a good man can inspire it long after he's gone. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. You asked Giovanni, your CFO, what was happening that night. You should have asked him who he was. Giovanni Bellini was one of the first scholarship students my father ever sponsored. A brilliant boy from a poor family in Naples. My father saw his potential, paid for his education, mentored him, and gave him his first job as a junior accountant at Innovate Dynamics. He was like a son to him. He used to come to our house for dinner on Sundays. Alessandro's face went slack with disbelief, the tick in his eye twitching erratically. Giovanni, his numbers man. His most trusted lieutenant for 15 years, the man who managed his personal fortune. When you took over, Ilara continued, her voice a blade of ice, Giovanni stayed. He didn't do it for you. He did it for my father. He watched you pervert everything my father built, turning a company of innovation into a machine of acquisition and asset stripping. And for 5 years, he has been my most valuable source of information. Every over-leveraged deal, every hidden debt, every secret vulnerability, he delivered it all to me. He was the ghost in your machine, Alessandro, the stone I used to bring down your fortress. The truth was a physical blow, more stunning than the loss of his fortune. He hadn't just been outmaneuvered, he had been hollowed out from the inside. He saw it now, Giovanni's quiet reassurances that a risky venture was sound, his subtle suggestions to shift assets into vulnerable funds, his perfect, meticulous records that had become a roadmap for his own destruction. So this was all for him, he stammered, desperate for a motive he could grasp. All for revenge? Don't flatter yourself, Ilara replied, her gaze turning to steel. Revenge was only the beginning. This is about restoration. I'm cleaning a stain from my family's legacy. You weren't the goal, Alessandro. You were just the stain. She reached into her handbag and placed a small velvet pouch on the table. It landed with a soft, unassuming thud. I believe this belongs to you. He opened it, his fingers clumsy and trembling. Inside was a simple, elegant vintage timepiece, a Longines with a worn leather strap and a small tarnished inscription on the back. To my son, Alessandro. Make your time count. He recognized it instantly. It was the first watch his father, a simple stonemason, had ever given him, a gift for his 18th birthday, bought with 6 months of savings. He hadn't seen it in 30 years. How? He whispered, his throat tight, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Your housekeeper found it in a box of old things you'd marked for disposal. She was another one of my father's scholarship students. You never bothered to learn her name, Ilara said coolly. The Patek was a symbol of what you became. This is a reminder of who you were before the greed consumed you. Perhaps there's still a part of that person left. She stood up, leaving her espresso untouched. My father taught me that true wealth isn't measured in what you take, but in what you build. You took everything from him, and in doing so, you lost yourself. I took everything from you to give him back his name. We are now even. She looked at him one last time, no longer with hatred, but with a cool, clinical pity that was somehow worse. Goodbye, Mr. Rossi. I suggest you learn to tell time on your own. He watched her walk out of the cafe and disappear into the bustling Milan street, a woman in complete control of her destiny. Alessandro Rossi was left alone at the table. He looked down at the old watch in his palm, its quiet ticking a stark contrast to the silent, shattered monument of the Patek. The inscription stared up at him, a judgment from a lifetime ago. Make your time count. He had counted it in billions of euros, in corporate takeovers, in vanquished rivals, and in the end it had all added up to nothing. He was left with only the ghost of a good man's gift, a relic of a life he no longer knew how to live. The debt was paid, but he was the one who was truly bankrupt. In her stark, minimalist office atop the newly christened Vance Tower, there was only one piece of art. On a pedestal of white marble sat a clear, polished block of resin. Suspended within it, like a prehistoric insect in amber, were the mangled remains of Alessandro Rossi's Patek Philippe. It wasn't a trophy, it was a memento mori, a constant silent reminder that power, like time, is a fragile construct, and that the most ornate symbols of strength can be undone in an instant. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ilara drove out of the city, leaving the world of boardrooms and balance sheets behind. She drove to a small, quiet cemetery nestled in the hills, a place of ancient cypress trees and peaceful silence. She found the simple granite headstone she was looking for. Arthur Vance, a beloved father, a brilliant mind. A man was already there, tending to the flowers at the base of the stone. He was in his late 40s, with kind eyes and a familiar, quiet demeanor. It was Giovanni Bellini. He looked up and smiled as she approached. Ilara, I thought you might come today. I couldn't stay away, she said, her voice soft. She knelt and traced the letters of her father's name with her fingertips. The anger that had fueled her for 5 years was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The roaring fire of vengeance had burned down to a warm, steady glow of love and accomplishment. He would be so proud of you, Giovanni said, his voice thick with emotion. Not for the victory, but for how you won. You didn't become him, Alessandro. You used his own arrogance against him. You honored your father's memory by proving that his principles, loyalty, integrity, building something that lasts, are stronger than greed. She placed a single white rose at the base of the stone. It's done, Dad, she whispered to the quiet air. Your name is clean. Your legacy is safe. Innovate Dynamics is what you always wanted it to be. The Arthur Vance Scholarship Fund is re-endowed, Giovanni. The first recipients start next month. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the cypress trees above, a sound like a soft sigh of release. Ilara stayed for a long time, not in grief, but in quiet communion. The past was settled. The ghosts were at rest. Her father's story had been given its proper ending. Now her own was just beginning. She stood up, brushed the dust from her knees, and walked back towards her car. Her shadow long in the afternoon sun, a woman who had moved a mountain. Not for revenge, but for redemption.